Hello, I am Eric Larson, and my movie was The Thing, which I'm pretty excited about because this was a movie I had seen parts of, but it was never something I would have sat down and watched the whole thing of. But now, after being forced to, as bad as that sounds, I'm super glad I did. So, The Prince of Darkness, not Ozzy, John Carpenter, who was famous for his horror films, mostly late 70s, early 80s. He cranked out Halloween, The Fog, The Thing. Halloween he made for I think it said $300,000, which is one of the most recognizable figures of all time, Mike Myers. And within that movie, he kind of cultivated his cheap scare. He was noted for jump scares, cheap scares, which I'm not a fan of. Usually, I don't like horror movies like that. I'm more so of a thriller horror movie fan, but John Carpenter just has a way to make it captivating. The use of his lighting. I found this quote from a critic saying he tries to make empty spaces look full and full spaces look empty. I just included that because it just it just makes sense. Watching The Thing, The Fog, and Halloween, having seen all three of those movies, I don't think I could explain it any better than that. And just something about that with the special effects or lack of budget makes it just kind of get your attention. Kurt Russell, these two, Kurt Russell and Carpenter, pictured here, were in many movies together. Well, Carpenter wasn't in the movies, the director, but Russell usually was his go-to star. And a lot of his horror movies have a sense of paranoia. Paranoia. He was big on suspense and paranoia. Not so much, in your face explosions or, killing. Continue with John Carpenter, kind of more of his backstory on his life. He was born in Carthage. Then he went all the way from New York to LA for film school. He went to USC, and then he began making short films in 1962. His idol growing up was Harold Hawks, who he kind of pays homage to multiple times. I know with his first movie, um, Assault on Precinct 13, was originally a Harold Hawks homage. It was one of his Western films that was adapted to kind of fit that movie. And then one interesting thing I also found while talking about Carpenter is he's actually still doing movies, or not even movies, but scripts and video games, which, for someone of his age and who's been making movies as long as he has, it was kind of surprising to see he really loves it that much. He's still, writing video games even, which I think is a crazy jump from movies to kind of the modern day version of that. The cast, I picked Keith David as Childs. I think this is a great character. He's probably my favorite character in the entire movie. I found a great interview with him explaining how Roger Mosley actually was going to get the part until he got Magnum PI, which I don't think was a bad career move from Mosley at all. But David was extremely thrilled to get the part because of it. It was this big break in Hollywood. He really hadn't been in anything big, and even with this kind of like early start, he wasn't a big star. He was, as sad as it is, traditionally African Americans didn't make it to the end of the film. The ending scene with David and Russell is kind of new. Audiences didn't, weren't used to a character like Childs to make it all the way, and I thought that was really cool. And I think, he really adds a lot to the movie. And he actually said about the ending, he felt like was set up for a sequel. Um, he didn't know. He said he didn't speak with Carpenter. He didn't know what Carpenter's intention really was, whether Child was the thing, Russell was the thing, neither were the thing, they live or they die. And I think that's kind of the magic of the ending, but I just thought it was interesting that even Keith David had no idea. And he never asked Carpenter. But he did say the breath, how there's a lack of breath in his character, and the breath of Russell he would tend to believe that he was the thing. But Russell and Carpenter have both said that the ending has no true answer, which leads me to the other character, of course, Kurt Russell. He got started at a young age in Western films. He signed a contract with Disney in the late 60s, early 70s, and he just exploded into a superstar of the 70s. And Walt Disney's last written words, I'm sure you've heard this myth, but his last written words were Kurt Russell, but Kirt. He spelled it wrong. So, was he really a friend? I don't know. He actually tried out for Han Solo, and being a Star Wars fan myself, I thought that was really cool. I couldn't even imagine Kurt Russell as Han Solo in the Star Wars universe. Everything would be different. It wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but I don't think anyone could replace Han Solo. But he starred in many John Carpenter and Tarantino films, which is interesting as well because I'm also a fan of Quentin Tarantino. And he starred in The Hateful Eight, which he also described as being similar to The Thing and this huge sense of paranoia. The whole Hateful Eight is a paranoia film. And I just thought it was cool that many years later, Kurt Russell was still doing kind of the same genre of movies. He states that the ending isn't meant to have an answer, like I just mentioned. So Keith David maintains this. He doesn't know, kind of mystery about the scene. It could be this, it could be that. Whereas Kurt Russell has come out and said that he worked with Carpenter on the ending, and it's not meant to have an answer, but just intensify the paranoia in the moment of the two men, one on one, which is boring. The production of this movie was everything about the movie. $15 million, and I think $2 million of that were just the special effects, which was definitely worth it. They shot the outdoor scenes in Alaska, California, Canada, which makes sense because it's all kind of western coast. The filming lasted just 12 weeks, but they did take a break, which some have said the break allowed Carpenter to really perfect the script and kind of hammer home this classic, but not instant classic. But it was, as it later found critical acclaim. It has kind of a cult following now. It's not so much a blockbuster big movie, but definitely has some hardcore fans. And the special effects, again, just make everything about the movie. I'm not a big fan of cheap scares, jump scares. Usually I would hate a movie like this, like I said earlier, but I mean, how could you not love that? Some of the effects he was able to pull off in this were just incredible. And even after watching it multiple times and doing extensive research about the special effects, I'm still in awe of how they did it. There was actually a 2011 film released under the same name. So it's still today being talked about in, I'd say, modern culture. I mean, 2011 feels modern, but it's actually a decade ago. But there have been talks of another remake, so it still begins to... People think they can make it better, but I don't think anything filmed can get better than just the original special effects, how you mentioned in class. The 80s was it. Even with computers, it may flow better, but nothing is going to look more real than the real thing. So the film itself was actually an adaptation of, again, Howard Hawks. Similar theme with Carpenter. He really loved Howard Hawks. His Thing from Another World. It was a kind of adaptation, but Carpenter put his own twist on it. And the film actually was nominated for the Best Horror Movie and Best Special Effects for the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films. However, it didn't do well at all. It didn't make nearly... Well, it did make profit, but barely any. And it was met with many negative reviews at the time. I think people were just kind of overlooking Carpenter's true masterpiece with the way the ending kind of just isn't the classic Carpenter cheap scare. You know, he could have went with one of the characters turns into the Thing and eats the other one in an epic ending and there's blood everywhere and it's scary. He more so went with the open-ended ending, and when it ends, you were anticipating that cheap scare so much, you really start to think about what happened. And I think the ending really tied the whole movie together. It had its cheap scares and its incredible effects, and it also had its good storyline and open for interpretation ending, which I thought was awesome. And the most important part, my interpretation, like I talked about earlier, blind fear, paranoia, the darkness. I think more so it encapsulates the paranoia that everyone lives with. And like you talked in class a little bit about the AIDS epidemic and the unknown with the blood. You know, blood seemed to be kind of a center focus in finding out who was good and who was bad. I kind of took that in a different way when I watched this film. Especially like the couch scene, I think really hammers it home. Um, that it's almost like xenophobic. Not the movie, but what it's trying to say. Where you have these people on the couch, they all look like humans, they all talk like humans, they all act like humans, but one of them is uh, a murderous alien. And I really kind of took that as certain people at certain times. I use this example as like the Armenian genocide or the Rwandan genocide, where neighbors fight against neighbors just because of social class or just culture, that another human would hate or think a different person's evil just based on their association or their culture. Um, and I think that this film kind of shows that, where these people are all seemingly the same. They're all humans. They're all people, but they just have that paranoia that one of them is this thing or evil, even though they're just like them. And I think that it really shows that people who carry out these acts truly believe that these people are evil or they're monsters or they're not people, when in reality they're as much of a human as everyone. So that didn't make any sense. But yeah, I just think that the movie really just hammers home, even though everyone's a human and everyone's the same, people will always target or always, kind of make up that someone is evil or someone needs to be eradicated. Um, like blood purity lines and ethnic cleansing and eugenics and all the evil things like that in the world. I think this movie kind of pulls it all together in an epic way, over the top way, to really show that point. But yeah, that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I just have to say I extremely, surprisingly enjoyed the thing.